The rain didn't fall that night. It poured heavy and relentless, like the sky itself had decided to wash everything clean. I sat in my truck at a rest stop off Highway 90, the windshield wipers squeaking against glass I hadn't replaced in years. The divorce papers sat on the passenger seat, edges curling from my damp hands, the ink of her name bleeding just a little where a raindrop landed. Finalized. That's what the top page said. One word to close 32 years. Monica Brooks, now just Monica again. She took the house, the savings, the furniture I built by hand. Even my old dog went with her. I wasn't angry yet. I was hollow. There's a kind of silence that doesn't need peace to exist, just the absence of everything you thought mattered. The radio crackled through static, some late-night blues station playing a song about heartbreak and whiskey. I didn't have either. Just a soggy gas station sandwich and a half-empty thermos of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I chewed slowly, not because I was hungry, but because it gave me something to do other than think. The divorce hearing had ended only 6 hours earlier. I could still see it, the way Monica's lawyer smirked as she said the words, equitable division. I'd built every corner of that house, from the porch steps she used to sit on to the kitchen island she bragged about on Instagram. But on paper, her attorney turned my sweat into her asset. I remember the exact moment she looked at me across the courtroom, chin lifted like she'd finally won some invisible war she'd been fighting for years. "You never gave me anything worth keeping," she said. The words landed harder than the gavel that followed. The judge didn't flinch, neither did I. But something inside me cracked, not anger, not even pride. Just the last piece of belief that she'd ever been the woman who once waited for me in the rain with coffee and laughter. Now, the rain came without her. And it didn't feel romantic. It felt deserved. My truck smelled like old leather, gasoline and sawdust. The scent of every job I'd ever done. The one thing that still carried me. I glanced at the passenger side floorboard, where my father's old red toolbox sat, rust around the hinges, handle wrapped in duct tape. That toolbox was the first thing I'd ever bought with my own paycheck, back when I was 21 and thought hard work could fix anything. Funny thing about tools, they can rebuild everything but trust. I opened the glove box and found a photo stuck between registration papers, Monica and me on the porch the year we finished building the house. My arm was around her, and she was smiling, sunlight bouncing off the gold band on her finger. I stared at it for a long time, rain drumming on the roof like applause from a cruel audience. Somewhere between nostalgia and nausea, I tore the photo clean in half. I started the engine just to hear it rumble, an old, tired sound I trusted more than any voice I'd heard in years. The heater barely worked, but the hum filled the silence. Outside, the rest stop was nearly empty. A few semis idling, their taillights glowing faint red through the mist. The world kept moving. Mine had stopped. I replayed that moment in court again. Her words, her smirk, that feeling of being stripped of everything you ever thought mattered, and realizing no one cared. Not the judge, not her, not even the lawyer who smiled at her like they shared a secret. I thought of the years I'd spent making sure she never went without, fixing leaky sinks at midnight, selling my motorcycle to pay off her business loan, working overtime so she could open that boutique she bragged about. Every memory now felt like a bad investment. When the rain slowed, I stepped out of the truck, the cold air biting through my jacket. I stood under the flickering yellow light of the rest stop sign and looked at the reflection of myself in the glass window, greyer, older, smaller somehow. I didn't recognize the man staring back. That's when I decided I wasn't going to chase what I'd lost. I'd built my life once. I could do it again. I sat back inside, pulled the divorce papers onto my lap, and signed the last page with my initials, not out of obligation, but closure. And as I folded them neatly, I saw something. Her signature. Loopy, confident, unbothered. That was when something clicked inside me. That signature. That was her final word. The one thing she believed ended the story. But I knew better. I didn't have money, or a home, or even family left to lean on. But I had one thing that built all of it once before: patience. And patience, I'd learned, could outlast even betrayal. I turned off the ignition, leaned back in the seat, and let the rain fade into a soft whisper. For the first time in months, I didn't feel defeated. I felt still. And in that stillness, a strange thought settled in my chest, quiet, almost like a whisper from somewhere beyond my exhaustion. "You think she ended it, Daniel," it said, "but her signature, her greed, is just the beginning." I looked at the toolbox beside me, then at the papers one last time. A tired smile tugged at my mouth. "She took everything," I murmured to no one, "except the part of me that knows how to build it all back." I folded the papers, tucked them into the glove box, and whispered the words that carried me into the storm ahead. I thought the papers ended it all. I didn't know her signature had just started my revenge. The sound of rain tapping the truck roof carried me somewhere else, back to a time when everything I built still felt unbreakable. Before the lawyers, before the lies, before Monica learned how to weaponize love. I used to wake up at 4:30 every morning. The smell of pine and varnish clung to me like a second skin. Carpentry wasn't a job, it was blood memory. My father taught me how to square a corner long before he taught me how to shave. "Measure twice, cut once," he'd say. "Wood's like people, son. You rush it, you ruin it." By 25, I was running my own small workshop out of a rented garage. I'd come home covered in sawdust, my hands blistered but proud. That was when I met Monica, a receptionist at the building supply office across town. She smiled like she'd been waiting for someone to look at her the way I did. Back then, she loved the smell of sawdust, said it meant progress. We didn't have much, but we had each other. We bought a little plot on the outskirts of town, half-acre, nothing fancy. Every weekend we poured sweat into it. I'd hammer, she'd paint, I'd measure beams, she'd bring lemonade. When the house finally stood complete, we didn't even have furniture yet, just a mattress on the floor and a radio that played static more than music. Still, it felt like a castle. Those early years glowed like warm light through the window at dusk. I built custom furniture for clients and small homes for new families. Word spread fast. My work was slow but exact. I never left a crooked hinge or loose board. The jobs grew. I hired 2 men, then 4. Brooks Sons, even though I had no sons, became the name on the trucks. Monica loved it at first. She handled invoices, met clients, smiled big for pictures when the local paper called me the honest builder. We'd laugh over dinner about how people overpaid for fancy cabinets when all they needed was craftsmanship. She used to say, "You make homes, Dan, not houses." But time has a way of testing what love is built on. Success came slow, and that was never fast enough for her. Her friends started wearing nicer clothes, driving better cars, dining at restaurants that required reservations. I was still happiest in flannel and boots. She began to talk about moving up, about needing a better image for clients. It started small: a new car we couldn't quite afford, a bigger wardrobe, a trip to Vegas that every business owner takes. Then came the suggestion I still remember word for word. "Dan, if we merge everything, the workshop, the properties, even the house, under my name, we'll get better tax rates. My accountant friend says it's smart business." I remember wiping my hands on a rag, smiling, trusting. "If you think it helps, sure." That's all it took. 5 words to hand over decades of work. At first, nothing seemed wrong. She brought me coffee to the workshop, handled paperwork, made calls. But slowly, the tone changed. She spoke to clients as if she ran the business. When she'd introduce me, it was my husband who helps with the builds. I didn't correct her. I thought love meant letting things slide. Then came the new people, investors, she called them. Suits, smiles, fast talkers. They'd shake my hand, tell me how lucky I was to have a wife who thought like a CEO. I didn't realize she was already setting the table for the life she planned without me. By the time I saw the first transfer notice, one of our rental homes sold under her signature, I was more confused than angry. I confronted her, and she smiled that same soft smile she used when convincing me to buy new curtains. "It's business, Daniel. Don't be dramatic. She kissed my cheek and walked away. That's when I felt the ground beneath everything we'd built begin to crack. Weeks turned to months. Documents disappeared from the office. Client checks were rerouted. Then one day she stopped coming to the workshop altogether, said the noise gave her migraines. I didn't realize she was already moving accounts piece by piece into her own name. When my father passed, his old friend, Ethan Carver, came by the shop. He was a retired lawyer, grey suit, still sharp behind the eyes. He'd been with my father the day they registered the land for that first property. Ethan shook my hand, studied my face, and said quietly, "You look like a man who's giving away too much in the name of love." He saw it before I did. He tried to warn me, told me to review the deeds, to separate personal and business assets. I brushed him off. "Monica handles all that now," I said. "She's better with numbers." He looked at me for a long time. "Your father built everything with his hands," he said. "Don't let someone else sign it away with a pen." I didn't listen. Months later, Ethan stopped by again. I remember he brought a folder, but I was too busy on a job site to open it. It stayed in my desk drawer for years, until the day I came home to find the locks changed and my name removed from the company account. That night, sitting in my truck, I finally opened the folder. Inside were copies of my original ownership documents, everything Ethan warned me to keep safe. Beneath them was a handwritten note in his familiar scrawl, "Paper can't erase purpose. Keep building." I read that note a dozen times. The edges were yellowed, but the words felt fresh. Ethan had been right. I'd built houses for strangers, memories for clients, a future for someone who didn't believe in mine. Monica's greed didn't just steal property, it rewired how I saw love. I realized I'd built my entire world like a home without a foundation, beautiful on the surface, hollow beneath. The irony wasn't lost on me, a builder who never built anything for himself. I looked down at my calloused hands that night and laughed, a tired, bitter laugh that cracked in the middle. She'd taken everything tangible, but not the part of me that still knew how to create something from nothing. And as I folded Ethan's letter back into the envelope, I whispered a promise to the dark, to the rain, to myself. I built homes for everyone else. I just never built one for myself. Nights in the truck all felt the same, the hum of engines from passing semis, the dim yellow of streetlights, the quiet shame that followed me everywhere I parked. I learned to sleep sitting up, with my jacket for a pillow and the sound of rain for company. That week I found a small diner off the interstate that stayed open 24 hours. Cheap coffee, decent pie, free outlets, enough to charge my phone and pretend life hadn't fallen apart completely. The waitress, an older woman named Patty, always left an extra creamer by my mug. Maybe she saw something familiar in the way I sat alone, stirring sugar into my cup without tasting it. That night, as the clock neared midnight, my phone buzzed, the first voicemail I'd received in days. The number was unfamiliar. "Mr. Brooks, this is Alan Richards from Henson Pierce Law Offices," the voice said, polite but urgent. "We need to discuss the property your ex-wife recently sold. Please call me as soon as possible. It's important." I replayed it 3 times, frowning at the words, "property your ex-wife recently sold." Monica had already taken the house, the accounts, even the furniture. What else could there be? When the sun rose, I sat in my truck outside the diner and called the number. The same calm voice answered. "Mr. Brooks, thank you for returning my call. I represent the buyer of a lakeside cabin in Cedar Point, the one your ex-wife sold last month." I gripped the steering wheel, confused. "Cabin? That's not possible. My ex didn't own any cabin." He hesitated. "According to the records, she sold it under joint marital ownership. But upon review, your name appears on the original deed as sole beneficiary, part of your late father's estate." The air went still. For a second I couldn't breathe. "Wait. My father's cabin?" "Yes, sir. The same property your father, William Brooks, registered in 1974. It appears your ex-wife used an authorization letter, signed by you, to finalize the sale." My pulse thudded. "That's impossible. I never signed anything like that." There was another pause. Mr. Brooks, I'm sorry to say this, but the signature on the authorization form matches several older documents from your marital records. We believe your ex-wife may have reused your signature from prior filings. My jaw clenched. Forged. She'd forged my name. The lawyer continued, We've temporarily frozen the title transfer pending investigation. If you can verify ownership, we can file a reversal. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the windshield, a man who'd built homes for others now living out of his own truck, robbed of even his father's memory. The cabin wasn't just another property. It was where my father taught me everything, how to use a level, how to listen to the wood before cutting. After he died, I promised I'd never sell it. It was the only place left that still felt like family, and she sold it, not for need, but for greed. That night I drove to Cedar Point. It was nearly 2 hours north, the kind of place where fog rolled thick over the water and silence carried meaning. I parked by the lake, headlights cutting through mist until the cabin appeared. Smaller than I remembered, but still standing proud against the wind. The new owners hadn't moved in yet. A sold sign leaned crooked against the fence. The porch light was off, but I could still see the outline of the old oak tree where my father and I used to hang lanterns in the summer. I stepped out, walked up to the porch and ran my hand across the railing. The wood was cold, rough, familiar. For a moment, I saw his hands again, strong, steady, worn with work. I could almost hear his voice. You build things to last, Danny. Not just walls, promises too. I swallowed hard. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered. I should have protected it. Anger didn't come all at once. It started slow, like a crack beneath the surface, deep and quiet. All those years I'd ignored Ethan's warnings, all those documents I'd signed without reading, all that trust I'd mistaken for love. But as I stood there under the grey morning sky, the guilt began to burn away, replaced by something sharper, stronger, determination. If she thought she could forge my name and bury my father's legacy, she hadn't learned who she married. I drove straight to Ethan's old office the next morning. The sign was faded, but the man behind the desk hadn't changed much. Older now, glasses perched low, that same calm in his voice. He looked up as I walked in. Daniel Brooks, you look like a man with a story. I told him everything, every word, every detail. He didn't interrupt, just listened, the way only people who truly care know how to. When I finished, he leaned back and said, You still have the original deed, don't you? I blinked. I think so. My father gave me a folder years ago. It's somewhere in storage. Ethan smiled faintly. Then you already have what she can't fake. The truth. Bring it here, and we'll start with that. When I found the old folder buried beneath boxes of tools in the truck bed, my hands trembled. Inside, sealed in a yellowing envelope, was the cabin's original deed. My father's name. My name beneath it. His signature still strong, still proud. I held it like a heartbeat. Back at Ethan's office, he compared the documents, shaking his head. She copied your old signature from an insurance form. Sloppy work. We can prove this easily. Easily. I'd forgotten what that word felt like. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt awake. As we drafted the first motion to reclaim the cabin, I caught my reflection in the window. Tired eyes, worn hands, but something alive behind them again. Ethan noticed. You know, Daniel, he said, most men break when they lose everything. You're lucky. You just remembered who you are. I nodded slowly, eyes on the deed. The weight of guilt finally lifted. It wasn't my fault she chose greed, but it was my choice to finish what she started. When I left his office that night, I stood under the streetlight, holding the deed tight in my hands. The rain had stopped. The air was clear. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the ground beneath me steady again. I looked up at the sky and whispered to the memory of the man who taught me everything. If she forged my past, I'll rebuild my future. One truth at a time. Ethan's office became my new workshop. The smell of coffee replaced sawdust, the creak of his old leather chair taking the place of my table saw. Different tools, Same purpose, fixing what someone else had broken. For the first time in months, I wasn't surviving. I was building again. Ethan wasted no time. If she filed forged documents, they'd have gone through a regional registrar, he said, flipping open his laptop. We'll start there. I still know people who respect the law more than shortcuts. Within a week, he'd reconnected with two of his old colleagues, retired attorneys who'd once handled real estate archiving for the county. They owed him favors, and Ethan wasn't shy about calling them in. We met one foggy morning in a back room full of metal filing cabinets and dust thick enough to write names in. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead was steady and cold. One of the clerks, a tall man with a limp, pulled out a box labeled 1974 W. Brooks Estate. When he opened it, the air seemed to still. Inside were the original property deeds, yellowed pages, crisp edges, and a signature I knew by heart. William Brooks. Next to it, in black ink, my name. Daniel Brooks, sole beneficiary. No co-signers, no marriage clauses, no joint ownership. Ethan slid his glasses down, reading aloud. Filed March 12, 1974. Updated January 2006. Notarized again by the state clerk. He looked up at me, a rare smile forming. That's your proof, Daniel, solid as the nails in your old porch. I stared at the paper. My father's handwriting was rough, heavy on the downstrokes, the same way he spoke, firm, certain. It hit me like a wave of warmth and shame all at once. He'd made sure I couldn't lose it, and still, I almost had. Ethan clapped my shoulder. We'll make copies and store them safely. The law may move slow, but truth doesn't rot. That night, sitting in my truck outside his office, I scrolled through social media, something I hadn't done in weeks. The screen lit up my tired face as Monica's latest post filled the feed. She was smiling on a boat, holding a champagne glass, her new boyfriend, a slick-haired realtor, standing beside her. The caption read, "New beginnings, better views." Another post followed. Some of us build our own futures, others just hammer nails. I didn't feel anger, just a strange calm, the kind that comes when you've already decided to outlast the noise. I took a screenshot, saved it, not for revenge, for record. Every photo, every brag, each one a small tile in the mosaic of her own undoing. Days turned into weeks as Ethan built the case quietly. The buyer's legal representative, a woman named Linda Foster, called one afternoon. "Mr. Brooks, my client purchased the lakeside property under good faith, but if fraud's proven, we're prepared to cooperate fully." Her tone was respectful, a far cry from the arrogance I'd grown used to hearing. She added, "For what it's worth, your father's reputation around Cedar Point was legendary. I'm sorry this happened to his legacy." Her words hit deeper than she knew. Ethan leaned back after the call ended, tapping a pen on the desk. "She's honest. That helps. We'll let the investigation speak for itself. Just stay quiet for now." Silence. The same thing everyone once mistook for weakness became my armor. While the world assumed I'd disappeared, I worked every night, taking odd carpentry jobs under a different name, saving cash, eating cheap meals, and keeping records of everything. Each nail I drove into a new frame reminded me that I wasn't rebuilding for revenge. I was rebuilding because it was the only thing I knew how to do when life splintered. On weekends, Ethan would join me at a small diner, going over new findings between cups of black coffee. Her boyfriend, he said one afternoon, is the listing agent for 3 other properties she transferred. Looks like they've been flipping under false authorizations. I took another bite of pie, calm. Then let the paper trail do what fists never could. He laughed quietly. "You've changed, Daniel." "Not really," I said. "I just learned that patience makes better noise than anger." Meanwhile, Monica kept flaunting her new life. Vacation photos, expensive wine tastings, caption after caption about finally finding happiness. Each post was another nail in her own coffin. Digital proof of assets she couldn't explain. Ethan filed motions to subpoena the realtor's firm. We worked in silence, never tipping our hand. No confrontations, no threats, just steady, quiet progress. I lived most days out of my truck still, But I started saving enough to rent a small room above an auto shop. Nothing fancy. A bed, a table, a place to breathe. It felt like the start of something honest again. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking at my father's old tools, wondering if he'd be proud or disappointed. Then I'd think of what he told me once when I messed up a foundation on a client's home. Don't tear down what you can rebuild stronger. That line kept me going. One evening, after filing our last motion, Ethan stood by his office window looking out at the dark streetlights. "You know what happens next?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "We wait." He nodded. "And while we wait, she'll keep talking. That's what people like her do. They fill silence with noise. But noise never builds anything." He was right. Over the next month, everything started aligning. The court acknowledged the pending claim. The buyer's trust placed a temporary freeze on the sale funds. Monica's social pages turned quieter, fewer photos, fewer smiles. Maybe she felt the storm she'd invited. I spent those nights driving past the lake again. The cabin stood in the distance, its reflection calm against the water, just as it had when I was a boy. I thought of the day my father handed me the first key, saying, "It's not yours because I gave it to you. It's yours because you'll take care of it." And for the first time, I truly understood what he meant. This fight wasn't about property or pride. It was about remembering where I came from, and proving that patience could outlast deceit. When I got back to my truck that night, I opened Ethan's latest email, confirmation from the registrar that the cabin's deed still legally listed me as sole beneficiary. All we needed now was the hearing date. I stared at the screen, a small smile forming as the dashboard light flickered softly against the rain. They thought silence meant defeat. They thought the man who built homes with his hands would never rebuild himself. But they forgot the first rule my father ever taught me. The foundation isn't the part people see. It's the part that holds everything up when the storm hits. And as the rain began again, I leaned back in the seat, whispering to the dark. They thought silence meant defeat. I was just laying the foundation. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and nervous sweat, that mix of paper, silence, and judgment. I sat in the second row behind Ethan, watching the empty defense table across from us. My hands rested on my knees, steady but warm. I'd built hundreds of homes, hammered thousands of nails, but I'd never felt pressure like this. The door opened sharply. Monica walked in first, heels clicking, hair immaculate, perfume cutting through the stale air. Her lawyer, a young man in an expensive suit, followed. Behind them came her boyfriend, the realtor, all grin and arrogance, pretending he belonged in the same room as Justice. She didn't look at me at first, but when she did, her expression shifted. Confidence cracked for just a second, then returned like polished glass. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The bailiff's voice echoed, "Court is now in session." I took a slow breath, eyes on the bench. Ethan adjusted his glasses, calm as always. The man could have been reading a grocery list for how unshaken he looked. Monica's lawyer opened first, his tone rehearsed. "Your Honor, my client legally sold the Cedar Point property during the dissolution of marriage. All transfers were made in good faith under joint ownership and processed through official channels." He smiled toward her like a man expecting applause. The judge nodded, expression unreadable. "Mr. Richards, proceed with your evidence." Ethan stood slowly, voice even but firm. "Your Honor, the property in question was not joint marital property. It was part of the William Brooks estate, deeded solely to Daniel Brooks in 1974. My client's ex-wife forged authorization using a recycled signature from unrelated insurance documents. We can prove it." The room shifted, quiet whispers spreading like a fuse being lit. Ethan pressed a button on the projector. The screen lit up with two images, one of the authorization Monica used and one of Daniel's original signature from 10 years ago. The resemblance was perfect, too perfect. Even from my seat, I saw her shoulders tighten. Ethan continued, his tone clinical. "Notice the exact angle of the B and the identical ink flow patterns. Signatures vary by natural motion. This is not variation, it's duplication." The judge leaned forward. "You're alleging forgery?" Ethan replied. "Not alleging, Your Honor. Demonstrating." He turned to the bailiff. "Please enter Exhibit 4B, the original deed." A clerk brought the folder forward. Ethan opened it with the same patience I'd seen him use fixing an old clock once. He laid the deed flat under the courtroom light. The name read, Daniel Brooks, sole beneficiary, no co-owner, no shared claim. Ethan straightened his back, voice soft but sharp. This property was never hers to sell. The silence that followed was electric. The sound of shuffling papers stopped. Someone in the gallery let out a quiet gasp. Monica blinked fast, whispering to her lawyer, who now looked more like a man trying to escape his own suit. Her boyfriend shifted uncomfortably in the back row, his smirk fading. The judge examined the document closely, then looked over the rim of his glasses at her. "Mrs. Brooks, did you or did you not authorize this sale personally?" She hesitated. I believed I had the right. My husband, he—" Ethan interrupted gently. "Belief is not ownership, Your Honor. Facts are." The judge's pen tapped twice against the desk. "This evidence is clear. Mrs. Brooks, you sold property without legal claim. The sale is void pending restitution." Monica's lawyer rose, stammering, "Your Honor, my client—" But the judge cut him off. "Sit down, counselor. I've heard enough." The sound of the gavel struck through the courtroom like thunder. Case ruled in favor of Daniel Brooks, all property rights restored. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I just breathed. The first full breath I'd taken in years. Across the aisle, Monica's face collapsed. The color drained from her cheeks as reality hit. Her boyfriend stood, whispered something sharp, and walked out, never looking back. She turned toward me, eyes wide with disbelief. But there was no anger left in me to meet her with, only silence, and the kind that doesn't punish, just ends things. Ethan gathered the papers calmly, nodding once before whispering, "It's done." As I stood to leave, I caught one last glimpse of her, head bowed, hands shaking, the woman who once said I'd never given her anything worth keeping. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I had given her something: love, patience, loyalty. She just sold them cheap. When I stepped outside, the air was cold and sharp, the kind that makes you feel alive again. Ethan clapped my shoulder. "How's it feel?" I exhaled slowly, watching the sunlight spill through the courthouse steps. Like the storm finally passed. He smiled. "You know, Daniel, some people build homes. You built justice." I looked out at the sky, the light reflecting off the wet pavement. She sold my father's cabin for comfort and bought herself a lifetime of shame. And as I walked down those courthouse stairs, I didn't feel like a man who'd won. I felt like a builder who'd finally finished what his father started. The courthouse doors swung open, spilling sunlight onto the marble steps. Reporters buzzed outside, microphones raised, cameras flashing. Ethan slipped away quietly, giving me space. He knew this part wasn't legal anymore. It was personal. Monica stood by the steps, arms crossed, eyes hidden behind large sunglasses that didn't quite hide the cracks beneath them. When she saw me, she straightened up, forcing composure she didn't have. "You left me no choice," she said, her voice trembling between guilt and anger. "I had nothing, Daniel. I did what I had to do." I stopped halfway down the stairs, the hum of reporters fading into background static. "You had everything, Monica," I said calmly. "You had a name, a home, a man who would have rebuilt the world for you, until you sold both for comfort and lies." She flinched. "You think I wanted this? You think I meant for it to go that far?" I shook my head slowly. "You meant every word. You just didn't think I'd remember them." The crowd hushed around us. Cameras shifted. For once, the story wasn't about her smile. It was about the truth standing in front of her. From inside my jacket, I pulled a manila envelope, the same one she'd handed me months ago during the divorce proceedings, when she walked away certain she'd won. I held it out to her. Her eyes flicked to the familiar seal, confused. "What is that?" I stepped closer, just enough for her to see the red stamp on the front. Invalid, fraudulent assets discovered. "This," I said, "is what greed does when it signs faster than it thinks." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. "You wanted the house," I continued quietly. "You wanted the title, the image, the applause. You can have all of it. I don't want it anymore. I just wanted the truth to have an address again." For a second, something broke through her mask. Not pride, not anger, just fear. The kind that comes when someone realizes the game's over and there's no curtain left to hide behind. A reporter stepped closer, camera flashing. "Mr. Brooks, can we get a statement?" I turned slightly, still calm, still composed. "Just this," I said, glancing back at her. "You can lose a house and rebuild it, but once you lose your name, that's gone for good." She took a shaky step forward. "Daniel, please, I didn't mean—" But the sound of shutters clicking swallowed her words. I looked at her one last time. The woman who once stood beside me under a roof we built together. The same woman who'd traded wood and heart for marble and ego. And for the first time I didn't see my past. I saw a lesson. I placed the envelope gently on the courthouse railing between us. "Take it," I said softly. "It belongs to you more than it ever did to me." Then I turned and started walking down the stairs. Behind me I could hear her voice breaking, pleading, angry, then quiet. The noise of the reporters rose again, swallowing everything. As I reached the bottom step, Ethan was waiting by the curb, his old car humming. He looked up at me with that small, knowing smile. "Done?" I nodded. "Done." He handed me my father's watch, the one I'd left in his office for safekeeping. The ticking sound was faint but steady, just like my heartbeat. "Where to now?" he asked. I looked back once, Monica surrounded by microphones, her perfect image cracking under daylight, then forward toward the street. "Home," I said quietly. "Wherever I decide to build it next." And as we drove away, the courthouse faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by sunlight and open road, proof that some closures don't come with doors, only distance. The cabin stood quiet again, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty anymore. Morning light filtered through the window panes, landing softly on the worn wood floors I'd refinished myself. The smell of pine and fresh varnish mixed with coffee, a scent that somehow felt like peace. I'd rebuilt it all, not just the walls, but the man who once lived inside them. The lake outside shimmered with the same reflection I'd stared at as a boy, only now I understood what my father used to mean when he said, "Still water doesn't mean it's shallow, it means it's sure." Every weekend a handful of young carpenters came by, boys and men trying to start over, some broken, some lost. I taught them the same lessons my father once taught me: how to measure twice, cut once, and never take shortcuts. Not in work, not in life. We'd sit by the fireplace after long days and they'd ask, "Mr. Brooks, how did you learn all this?" I'd smile and tell them the truth. By losing everything that wasn't built on honesty. Above the mantel hung a framed photo of my father, his smile quiet and proud. Beneath it, etched into a wooden plaque I carved myself, were his words: "Legacy is earned." I'd read that line every morning before I started my day, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but of what I'd rebuilt. News of Monica reached me occasionally, mostly through whispers from old neighbors or an article online. Fraud charges, asset seizures, bankruptcy. The woman who once claimed she couldn't live small was now learning what it meant to live without truth. I didn't gloat. I didn't even feel triumph. Just a kind of quiet closure, the kind that comes when life balances its own scales. One evening, Ethan came by the cabin. He brought 2 coffees and stood at the doorway, looking around with a grin. "You did it, Daniel. You really rebuilt it." I nodded, smiling faintly. "This time I built it right. No names on paper, no promises on borrowed trust." He looked up at my father's photo, reading the words carved beneath it. "Legacy is earned, huh?" "Yeah," I said, "and sometimes you have to lose everything to understand how to earn it." The fire crackled, the lake outside calm under a fading sunset. As the night deepened, I thought about everything I'd gone through, The betrayal, the courtroom, the long drives through storms, it all led back here to peace, not revenge. I lost a wife, a house, and a name I once thought defined me. But I gained something that can't be taken again. Myself. I looked into the fire and whispered, I lost everything but my honor. And that's what rebuilt me. And as the clock ticked softly in the corner, I realized what my father had always tried to teach me, that revenge doesn't build, it breaks. But truth builds everything again, stronger than before. Revenge ends when truth stands tall.